Does faith need evidence, or is it just a blind leap in the dark? Have you ever wondered if faith is a step of reason or just blindness? Do we need tangible proof to strengthen our faith? Welcome back, everyone. Today, we're going to dive deep into a controversial topic, a question often posed as a challenge. Does faith need evidence? I'm sure many of us have heard or even said things like, "I'm a person of reason. I only believe in what I can see and prove." In a world that increasingly values science and data, believing in an invisible being, in things that can't be measured in a lab, seems like an irrational act, an intellectual step backward. People often picture faith and reason as sworn enemies, like water and fire, like day and night. You have to choose one or the other. But is that really the case? Is faith truly a blind leap in the dark, or is it a well-grounded step toward the light? Let's break this down together. Before we can answer the main question, we need to clarify two important concepts that are often misunderstood: evidence and faith. When we hear the word evidence, most of us immediately think of scientific evidence, something that can be repeated in a lab, observed through a microscope or a telescope. This is the currency of the natural sciences. But if we only accept this type of evidence, we'd have to throw out many things we still believe to be true. For example, you can't use the scientific method to prove that Napoleon existed, or that Julius Caesar crossed the Rubicon. You can't replicate those historical events in a lab. Instead, we rely on historical evidence, ancient texts, records from multiple sources, and archaeological findings. Similarly, in a courtroom, a prosecutor doesn't always have a video of the culprit committing the crime. They build a case based on legal evidence, fingerprints, motive, witness testimony, circumstantial facts. When all this evidence comes together, it forms a coherent picture, so much so that a jury can reach a conclusion beyond a reasonable doubt. So, limiting evidence to just the realm of empirical science is a mistake. Evidence comes in many forms: scientific, historical, philosophical, and even personal experience. Now, let's talk about faith. The enemy of faith is not reason, but fideism, that is, blind belief in spite of the evidence. Faith in the Bible is not about closing your eyes and believing anyway. Rather, faith is defined as well-placed trust. It's not a leap into the dark, but a step of trust after considering the evidence. Imagine you want to sit on a chair. You don't just close your eyes and throw yourself at it. Your reason works first. You look at the chair, see that it has 4 sturdy-looking legs, is made of good material, and other people are sitting on similar chairs. This is the evidence. Based on this evidence, you draw a reasonable conclusion that the chair can support you. But all of that is still not enough. Finally, you must perform an act of faith. You actually put your weight on the chair. Faith is the act of trust based on the evidence that reason has gathered. Therefore, the question shouldn't be, does faith have evidence, but rather, what is the evidence for faith, and is it compelling enough? If faith needs evidence, then where is it? We can't put God in a test tube, but we can look for His fingerprints in the world we live in. Here are a few lines of evidence that philosophers and theologians have presented for centuries. First, there's the evidence from the existence of the universe. This is a very basic argument. Whatever begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist. Therefore, the universe must have a cause. Most people agree with the first premise. Everything around us has a cause. The phone you're holding was made by someone. The tree outside grew from a seed. The second premise, the universe began to exist, was once controversial, but is now strongly supported by the scientific community, especially with the Big Bang Theory. Science tells us that all space, time, and matter exploded into being from a single point of singularity about 13.8 billion years ago. If the universe had a beginning, the next logical question is, what caused it? This cause must be outside the universe, meaning it must be spaceless, timeless, and immaterial. It must be incredibly powerful to create the entire universe from nothing. A spaceless, timeless, immaterial, and incredibly powerful cause? Does that sound familiar? These are descriptions that are very close to the concept of God in monotheistic religions. Science can bring us to the doorstep of the Big Bang, but reason and philosophy can help us ask about the one who pushed the start button. Perhaps one of the most powerful arguments in modern times is the evidence from the fine-tuning of the universe. Physicists have discovered that the existence of life in the universe depends on an extremely delicate balance of numerous physical constants and laws. For example, the gravitational constant. If it were just a tiny bit stronger, the universe would have collapsed back on itself shortly after the Big Bang, with no time for galaxies and stars to form. If it were a tiny bit weaker, matter would never have clumped together to form stars and planets. Physicist Paul Davies calculated that if this constant were changed by just 1 part in 10 to the 60th power, a life-permitting universe would be impossible. Or consider the strong nuclear force, the force that holds particles together in an atom. If it were 5% weaker, the universe would only have hydrogen, no other elements. If it were 2% stronger, protons couldn't exist, and there would be no atoms at all. There are dozens of such constants, and they all fall within an incredibly narrow range, like dials that have been perfectly tuned for life to exist. There are 2 ways to explain this incredible fine-tuning. Either it's due to unbelievable luck, or it's due to intentional design. For comparison, imagine you walk into a room and see 100 rifles all pointed at your head. Each rifle is connected to a random number dial from 1 to 100. You will only survive if all 100 dials land on the number 77. The odds are astronomically small. And then it actually happens. All 100 dials land on 77, and you survive. At that moment, what would you think? Would you conclude you're the luckiest person in the universe? Or would you suspect that someone rigged it, that they fine-tuned the machines? Reason would tell us the design hypothesis is far more plausible than pure luck. Our universe is just like that. Another powerful piece of evidence is the evidence from the inner moral compass. As we've mentioned before, deep within every human being, regardless of culture or era, there is an innate sense of right and wrong. We know that love is better than hate, courage is better than cowardice, and justice is better than injustice. Even when we don't follow these rules, we know they exist. We get angry when we see an innocent person being treated cruelly. Why? If humans are merely the product of a purposeless evolutionary process, the only law should be survival of the fittest. So where do altruism, self-sacrifice, and the concept of universal justice come from? Some argue that morality is a social convention. But if that were true, we couldn't condemn actions like the Holocaust by Nazi Germany. We could only say, we don't like it, but that was their society's convention. But no, deep down, we know that act was objectively wrong, regardless of which society accepted it. The existence of this objective moral law suggests the existence of a moral lawgiver. Just as traffic laws imply a lawmaker, moral laws imply a morality maker. And finally, there's the historical evidence for Jesus Christ. For the Christian faith, the evidence doesn't just stop at philosophy, but moves into history. The core of this faith is an event that can be investigated by historical methods, the resurrection of Jesus. Most historians, including non-believers, agree on a few core facts. Jesus was a real historical figure who lived and was crucified under the Roman governor Pontius Pilate. After his death, his disciples claimed that he had risen from the dead. His tomb was discovered to be empty on Sunday morning. The disciples who had been fearful and scattered suddenly became courageous, willing to endure torture and martyrdom to preach about this resurrection. The historical question here is, what best explains these facts? Did they lie? This is highly unlikely. People lie for personal gain like money, power, or fame. What did the disciples get? They were ostracized, beaten, imprisoned, and ultimately killed. No one dies for a lie they know is a lie. Were they hallucinating? Hallucinations are private, individual experiences, not group phenomena. The Bible records that Jesus appeared to more than 500 people at one time. For 500 people to have the exact same hallucination is psychologically impossible. Did they go to the wrong tomb? If so, the Jewish and Roman authorities would have simply gone to the right tomb, opened it, and displayed the body of Jesus to crush the movement instantly. But they couldn't do that. When considering all the hypotheses, the disciples' own explanation that Jesus truly rose from the dead emerges as the most reasonable explanation, with the greatest power to account for all the historical data we have. This is not a blind belief, but a historical conclusion based on evidence. So, are faith and reason friends or foes? From this analysis, we can see that faith and reason are not enemies. They are like the two wings of a bird, both needed to fly high. Reason and evidence from the cosmos, fine-tuning, morality, and history build a solid foundation, a compelling case for God's existence. They can bring you to the edge and show you that it is perfectly reasonable to take the step. But reason has its limits. It can tell you there is a designer, but it can't tell you his name. It can tell you there is a moral lawgiver, but it can't help you have a personal relationship with him. This is where faith comes in. Faith is personal trust, a step of the heart based on what reason has affirmed. Is it irrational to believe in something that can't be absolutely proven in a scientific sense? Not at all. We do it every day. You believe the external world still exists when you close your eyes to sleep. You believe in the minds of other people even though you can't see their thoughts. You believe in your family's love even though no machine can measure it. These are all reasonable beliefs, built on a wealth of indirect evidence and experience. Faith in God is the same. It is not irrational. What is irrational is to look at a universe fine-tuned to the last detail, to feel a deep moral compass within, to face the unique historical evidence for the resurrection, and then conclude that it's all just a meaningless accident. That is truly a leap of faith, but a faith in absurdity. So, to answer the original question, does faith need evidence? The answer is yes, but we must broaden our definition of evidence. True faith is not believing in the absence of evidence, but trusting in the direction the evidence points. It is not the denial of reason, but the fulfillment of reason. Reason builds the road, and faith is the courageous act of walking on it. The journey of faith does not require you to check your brain at the door. On the contrary, it invites you to use it to the fullest. It challenges you to consider the evidence from cosmology, physics, philosophy, and history. It doesn't demand 100% certainty because that doesn't exist in any area of life. But it does ask for a reasonable judgment about where the weight of the evidence lies. What are your thoughts on the relationship between faith and reason? Which lines of evidence made you think the most? Or do you have counter-arguments you'd like to raise? Please leave a comment below. I truly value and want to learn from your perspective. If you found this discussion helpful, don't hesitate to like it, share it with friends who are also wrestling with this issue, and subscribe so we can continue these deep conversations together. Thanks for listening. See you next time.